And hello everyone, welcome. I'm Andrew Rickson, and I'm joined with my colleague Bob Dick, who many of you know is an inveterate action researcher, well known for decades of work in action learning, action research, and I've been running a company called Babelfish Group, which is really a solo practice of me doing open space, action learning, organizational development type of work. And Bob and I have kicked off a series of pop-up conversations. And the last pop-up conversation that we had was themed around a particular quote. And in fact, the conversations that are coming up all have particular quotes. The quote that we used to kick us off was, "Show me an organization where there is no conflict, and I'll show you one where nobody cares." And this is by Harrison Owen, the originator of Open Space. Bob, where did you arrive to on your reflections after the pop-up conversation around that particular quote before we move on to today's quote?
My first reaction was that it's often true, but there are also high-performing teams where people find it very difficult to deal with conflict. And there I'm most guided by the work of Chris Argyris, who explains how there are taboos against letting each other know what motives we attribute to each other. And when people form assumptions about each other's motives and don't test them before acting on them, then that really fouls up the dynamics of the team pretty badly. So I think there are high-performing teams which could be even more high-performing if they were more skilled at dealing with conflict.
That's interesting. And where I arrived to thinking about that, and also from our pop-up convo, was really about leaning into the discomfort, and how it's sort of Harrison's quote is a prompter, I suppose, to be courageous and explore some of the conflict. So today's quote is by Reg Revens, who is known as the founder of Action Learning, and his quote is, "The most precious asset an industry has is the lived experience of its real managers." So if I were to share that, while I'm doing that, Bob, how about what's your sense on this quote? What does this have for you?
I think it makes the very important point that an enormous amount of organisational change is done top-down, planned by the executive teams and then cascaded down to whatever level of the organisation has to implement it. And that has two difficulties. One is that the people who are doing the planning don't really understand what Reg Revens called the lived experience of its real managers, or its real workers for that matter. And it means that the people who have to implement it don't have any real commitment to it. And so if it's not working, they just fudge it and do as little as possible on it. Whereas if it were their idea, they would struggle with it until they got it to work. And so it seems to me that there's something profoundly important in Reg Revens' quote about the reality of organisational change and why so little of it is as successful as it might be.
In fact, I think we know some of the quotes. Around 70% of change initiatives fail, don't we, Bob?
That's right.
That's interesting. I suppose I was thinking about this quote, and for me, I suppose I was thinking around, there's an interest around what are the processes that we can use that really help to provide value to get work done. And I was thinking about, I think you talked about the ordinary person, Bob, and the role of the ordinary person in change. And I suppose Reg Revens is really against experts of all forms. And so for me, that's sort of the connect to open space and action learning in this quote of, here are two processes that are really about helping to get real work done. And I suppose for me, there was also a connect back to the first quote on conflict, and that is that if you think about lived experience of real managers, often sharing that is conflictual for those managers, isn't it? It's quite confronting to really look at the reality of how things have gone and how things haven't gone. And so I find that that's an interesting connect back to conflict and the first quote.
And it's probably worth saying that the reason we chose Harrison Owen and Reg Revens for the first two quotes we looked at is because they were the originators, respectively, of open space and action learning.
Yeah.
And as I said in our previous session, I think that's a powerful combination because open space legitimizes some change efforts by involving the whole organization in it, and then action learning makes it happen on the ground by engaging the direct stakeholders in each of the projects.
Yeah. That's great. All right. Well, that's our pop-up conversation starter for today on the quote from Reg Revens. And this is all gearing up for Bob and I's two-day workshop on Kickstarting Change at Last, being held on April the 12th and 13th. We look forward to joining you for more conversations.
Indeed we do.